Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension. I am the farm to school lead for our team, and I work with Katie and Christy and Lindsay, who are all on the call here. So thanks for joining us. And folks, if we can mute, if you're not talking, that would be great. I always forget to do it myself.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming. I think, Katie, if you want to go to the next slide, we can introduce ourselves and just go through the housekeeping and stuff. So my name is Christy Apostolides. I am the farm to school coordinator for the lower Hudson Valley with Harvest, New York and Cornell Cooperative Extension. So I cover Orange, Rockland, Putnam, and Westchester counties.
And I'm Katie Sheehan Lopez. I'm the regional farm to school coordinator for the upper Hudson Valley, covering Dutchess, Ulster, Sullivan, Delaware, Greene, and Columbia counties.
And on the call with us as well, Lindsay, did you get a chance to introduce yourself? I don't remember if you did.
No, Lindsay Pasho. I am doing farm to school in the North Country in Essex, Clinton, and Franklin counties.
So Lindsay won't be speaking today, but she's here joining us as a representative of the North County. So for you guys that are up there, she's your main contact. And then Cheryl, I don't know if there's any other housekeeping you wanted to go through.
I'll just add that very quickly. So Harvest New York has been tasked, and we're happy to be tasked by New York State Department of Ag and Markets to coordinate farm to school support across the state. So we have, of course, the coordinators you see here. We also have one in Western New York. We'll be hiring in New York City and Central New York in the next few months. And then we partner with the rest of the coordinator base across the state who may be employed through different BOCES offices or county level extension offices. And so the team itself has been doing this work for about 10 years, and we've just been allowed to expand our reach by adding more coordinators. So really excited to be working in the Hudson Valley. My family comes from there, so I have a little special love for that area, and I lived in the city for 10 years. So I'm super excited about this meeting. And the only other thing I'll add is I'm going to be in the wings kind of managing chat and stuff like that. So if you have a question and you want to dump it in chat, if it's answerable, quickly, I'll respond in chat. Otherwise, we'll direct it to one of the presenters, but feel free to use the chat option as well.
I also wanted to mention that throughout this presentation, we are going to be asking questions just for our own data. So if you hear those questions, just like throw a little note in chat and Cheryl will record it. So I want to move on to the agenda. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. Essentially, we just get a little introduction to the Harvest New York and the program, and as well as the 30% initiative, defining what it is. State Ed has joined us, and they're going to take you through the 30% calculator, so how you can figure out that target number to participate in the 30% reimbursement program. And they'll also talk a little bit about the audit review process. And then sort of the next chunk is really just methods that you can use in order to actually reach that 30% goal. So different strategies that other SFAs have used successfully, and then some of the tracking and documentation that you need to start basically now if you want to apply for next year, so that you're not rushing at the end of the year to get through all of that. So the Harvest New York Farm to School program, we have some main goals. Really, we're here to provide support to SFAs so that you can procure more New York State food products. So both directly from the farms, more processed items, just as long as it's coming from New York State producers. And we can provide many different resources. We're here for you guys. And it has been done successfully in other parts of the state. So we have sort of institutional knowledge that you can tap into and that we can access for everybody. And we can work with individual school districts to help you procure the product and develop relationships. And we are also sort of regionally developing relationships with producers and processors to make sure you can actually source the items. Do you want to go on to the next slide? So some of the things that we offered is very much boots on the ground support. We can actually find local farm partners and processors, work on the back end through supply chains to make sure you can actually get the stuff in your buildings. We can work directly with you guys to look at how you're already procuring the food. We will help you draft the bid documents so that local producers that maybe wouldn't normally be bidding on these kinds of things have more comfort in doing so. We also, and this is something that we actually will be talking about through a training later, can help you with promotional campaigns, such as the New York Thursdays or Harvest of the Month, and the all important raising money. We have resources where you can, we can introduce you to resources that could provide grants to expand your farm to school initiatives. And finally, this particular training is to support the 30% initiative tracking and documentation requirements. So just making sure all your ducks are in a row. So what is the New York State 30% initiative? In 2018, former Governor Cuomo launched the No Student Goes Hungry initiative, where school food authorities that purchased 30% of their lunch, their total food costs for lunch were New York State produced items. They would then receive a reimbursement of 19 cents, which brings the total reimbursement from the state up to 25 cents per meal. So it's an extra chunk of money for everybody. And some of the confusion there is some confusion about a New York State food product. So what this means, I just wanted to define this so that it was clear. It's any food item that's grown, harvested, or produced in New York State. So any whole foods like, vegetables and meats that are purchased by you guys and are actually grown here. But also this includes a food item that could be processed inside the state, but also outside of New York State, as long as it takes those food items that were produced in New York State. It has to be at least 51% raw product. So, if they're making chicken fingers in Connecticut, as long as that all the chicken or 51% of the chicken comes from New York State, then it can qualify as a New York State food product. And then towards the 30% goal. So this was taken from a study that was done of districts that successfully applied for the 30% or achieved it and did receive the reimbursement. And you can see here that, in the 18-19 school year, there's a smattering of them, a handful of them in the western part of the state, and then that significantly increased from 19-20. And you can see that they're sort of clustered around these farm to school coordinators. So now that there's more of us around, hopefully we'll get more people applying for and qualifying for this reimbursement. And there is 2021, there's, let's say 49 schools applied for 2021, but they are still under review. And the absence of those going in, the absence of the school, so to go back to the last slide, I just want to mention that there's sort of like a big blank area in the North Country and in Hudson Valley, and that is mainly due to dairy being unavailable, but that is changing, and so we're hopeful for this year that there'll be more dots appearing on that map. So the next slide. So this is one of those questions that I mentioned in the beginning. If you have just like specific things that you need help with right now, you can just throw them in the chat and we'll record them and get back to you or answer them right now if it's possible. And if you have, we also can talk about it at the end, but we're just looking to see sort of, if you have specific questions right now that we can look to address, you can stick those in the chat. I think we're going to the next slide. So this is just to remind everybody that you have to get to 30%. 29.9% doesn't count, and it's just not enough. So you won't receive the reimbursement unless you're actually at or over 30% of your purchases, of lunch purchases. However, that it might be closer than you think. And dairy will play a big role in that. So that's something we're going to talk about quite a bit during this session. So this is just to go an overview of what the steps are that every SFA should take when they're considering this 30%, when they're considering applying for the 30% reimbursement. So the first thing is to figure out what that number is, calculate what that dollar amount would be, what your lunch expenditures would be if 30% of the products that you purchased were from New York State. And then after you have that number, see how much, determine your baseline. So see how much you are already actually purchasing that is New York State product. You might be surprised to find that it's more than you would expect. So maybe it's not such a large gap. And then, so once you have your target number, you can start to look and see, what are these food products that I can incorporate? Where do I get them? And then to bid and buy strategically is how you would get them. And then finally, just make sure that you're tracking all of this information as you're going along. So we have Michelle and Tara here from the Department of Education, who's going to take us through the 30% calculator and just give you some specifics about exactly how to fill this thing out so you can get that target number.
Hi, thank you. So I'm just going to take a minute to share our screen so we can get our PowerPoint up. Okay, so you should be able to see our PowerPoint now.
Yes, you're good.
Okay, thank you.
I think, is it big enough?
I think so.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Tara Webster and Michelle Beaver is with me. Like Michelle said earlier, we're from the New York State Education Department in the Child Nutrition Program Office. And our office administers the child nutrition programs. Michelle and I both lead a special team in the office, and one of the things that we handle is the 30%. So today we're going to walk through the 30% calculation tool. We'll give a basic overview of the calculation and the figures that would go into it. And I know Cornell Cooperative Extension is a huge help, but if you do have any questions after this presentation or anytime throughout the year, definitely feel free to give our office a call. We're always willing to have conversations and work with you. So please don't be a stranger if you need any help. So determining what 30% of lunch purchases is. So as you know, for the 30%, SFAs are required to purchase at least 30% of their total food costs for lunches on New York State products. So anything spent at breakfast doesn't count. And we know that most schools don't separate their costs from breakfast and lunch. So this calculation was developed to figure out what a school's or SFA's lunch cost is so that we can take 30% of that. And so the calculation was put into this Excel tool that you can use to determine how much you need to spend on New York products to qualify for the initiative. So this tool, this calculation is the only calculation that is allowed to be used for the initiative. It's the only way that you can determine what that 30% threshold would be. This is on our website. We have a dedicated page to the 30%. So if you go to our child nutrition website, we do have a farm to school page. And then if you click the 30% link, it will take you to all the resources, and this will be one of them. But we can also send that directly to you if you need us to. So the calculation is broken up into 4 different steps. The first step is meant to determine the total food cost percentage for your SFA. So SFAs will report their total annual food costs and their total annual revenue.
Tara,
And then, yep.
I don't think you're advancing slides if you're supposed to. I just wanted to flag that.
Oh, I see it changed on my screen, but you don't on yours?
No, it's just showing the main 30% calculation intro slide.
Oh, really? Okay. Let's see if I can stop sharing and I'll reshare.
Okay.
Maybe it got messed up when I made it big. Let's see.
Now I can
Do
see
you-
the tool. Yeah, do you want to just try to scroll through one slide so to make sure it's moving?
Did that move?
Yep, it's moving. Yep, you're good to go.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. All right, so the only slide that you missed was just a picture of the tool then. So not too much. Okay, so the first step is to calculate what the total food cost percentage is. So the first section there, what it does is it takes the total costs for the school year and it divides it by the total revenue that your SFA receives. And that will give your SFA's food cost percentage. Then the second step is the second block under where it says lunches. And that step is meant to determine what your income is from just reimbursable lunches. So this step will take the total reimbursement that you receive for the entire school year for specifically lunch meals. So it'll be your federal reimbursement for lunch and your state reimbursement for lunch, and then any additional revenue you receive for a lunch meal. So because, you know, a reduced price student doesn't pay any money in New York State, this figure would be just the amount of money you're receiving from a paid student in the paid category for reimbursable lunch sales. This school year, obviously, if you're participating in SSO, you're not charging anybody, and so this amount would be zero for this year. So once we've determined your food cost percentage in step 1, and then the income of reimbursable lunches in step 2, the next step 3 is to determine what the food costs are specifically for lunch. And so to do this, we take the food cost percentage we calculated in step 1, and then we apply it to the lunch revenue that we calculated in step 2. So if you take your total lunch revenue times the food cost percentage, that gives you the SFA's total lunch costs. So it is a little confusing, but if you go and you enter like actual numbers into this tool, it'll make a little bit more sense and you'll see how it calculates. Once you have that total lunch cost, the final step is to just take 30% of it. So that step 4 is just multiplying your lunch cost by 30%. And then at the very bottom here where you can see it says like hashtag DIV, that will populate with the amount that you have to spend in New York State Foods to qualify for the 30%. And if I'm going too fast, just slow me down. I tend to get going. So now that we've covered like the basic calculation, we'll talk about, you know, the actual figures that go into each step. So the total annual food costs, this will include the cost of all food for the entire school year. And the school year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So this figure will include any food that you purchased for breakfast, for lunch, snack, SSO this year, a la carte foods, adult meals, catering, any food that you purchased will go into that total annual food cost figure. And then the next 2 lines are for total annual reimbursement. And that again will be from July 1st to June 30th, the total amount that you receive for reimbursable meals, split up federal and state. And that's from your participation in National School Lunch Program, the Breakfast Program, SNAC, Summer Food Service Program, and if you participate in the Special Milk Program, that will go in there too. Our Child Nutrition Management System houses payment information. So if you want to go into CNMS, if you're a user of our system, you can go and look for your specific SFA to see what your payments are, and you can look back to previous years to see what that total annual figure is. You can look at it by monthly or for the full year if you want. The next figure, the total annual sales. So this will include the amount of revenue that you received from the sale of all foods. So for breakfast, lunch, snack, a la carte, adult meals, any money that you receive for the sale of food will go into that figure. And then we have an other box there, and that really is just for anything else. So any other revenue that the nonprofit school food service account receives will be put in that box. We have some schools that receive BOCES aid or a general fund transfer at the end of the year if you're running in the negative. So all of that revenue, if it's coming into the nonprofit school food service account, can be counted as revenue in that other box right there. And that will all total up to the total annual revenue in that step 1. And then we have the next section, that's step 2, the total annual school lunch federal and state reimbursement. So this is where we're really diving into your lunch revenue. So in the first section, step 1, we looked at your reimbursement for a total annual reimbursement for everything you receive. In this next step, in step 2, we're looking specifically at your lunch reimbursement. So we would want to know specifically your total lunch federal reimbursement and your total lunch state reimbursement. And again, in our CNMS system, you can populate payment information by program. So you could query lunch and get that total for a previous year or by month for this year if you wanted to. And then the total annual reimbursable school lunch sales, that's what we just talked about. That would be any revenue that you receive from a paid reimbursable lunch sale would go in that box. And then that would, all those figures would total to your total lunch revenue. And then again, once all of that information is filled in, then the 30% of your lunch cost is taken, and then that's how you determine the amount that you have to spend in New York food products. And I know there has been a lot of questions about, how do we fill this tool out this year? Because 21-22 school year is so different from, a normal year. It's a little bit better from last year, but definitely still different. And, we really don't have a great answer for that. It's very SFA specific. It really depends on the food that you're buying, on your participation level. And so I think, individual SFAs really have to look at, the amount they're spending on food and how much they're receiving in revenue, to get a good gauge. And it might be a situation where you use last year's figures just to give you an idea, and then you have to reevaluate a couple times throughout the year to see if you're meeting, that benchmark. But I know that's been a huge question this year. It's very difficult, to forecast because this year is so different. But, if you have a specific situation that you want to talk out or give our office a call, we can definitely, work one-on-one with you or with, Cornell Cooperative Extension too. So next we're going to move on to the review process. If you have any questions on the calculation part, you can type them in the chat box and we can get to them.
Okay, so I'm just going to kind of go over the review process because I know a lot of people, before they want to send in an application, they just want to kind of know what we're going to be doing as far as the review. So all SFAs that applied and that were approved should expect either an off-site or an on-site review for the 30% of their documentation. And this year, because of the pandemic, we're doing everything off-site because we're not going to be going to the schools. So, so this year is a little bit different. Our first year, we did some on-site. I think we did most on-site to, as far as the paperwork part. But this year, but with everything going on, you would just be sending in your documentation to us. So it's expected that all SFAs applying for the initiative, they have that supporting documentation available at the time their application is submitted. And then we'll review all the SFAs that have applied for the initiative unless they were already previously reviewed in the other 2 years. So if you qualified that first year and you had the review already, we're not going to review you again. So I know that was like a big question if we're going to, review them every year with an in-depth review, and that's not. It would just be if you were, if you didn't get reviewed before. So, we're going to review all the SFAs that applied. They're going to send documentation to us. It's going to be a preliminary review at first. And the reason we do that is just to make sure we don't want to approve everybody and then by the time we review them, we have to take back that money. So we really want to kind of get an idea if you're going to qualify or not. So this preliminary review is like kind of the first step after you apply. So during the review, we're going to request supporting documentation for the 30% initiative. We're also going to be providing guidance and technical assistance throughout that review too, because we do know this is complicated and there's a lot of questions. So, us and our team, we really work with the schools and try to explain things so everybody kind of understands. So some of the documentation that will be requested for the preliminary review, they may include the list of New York food items, some food invoices if needed, New York State documentation for each item, a sample of production records, the process on how the school separated out breakfast costs, and maybe some backup information to explain it. Documentation of revenue and expenses. We may or may not ask for that depending on, what we see in the initial review. And list of the New York State products purchased for the initiative with the total dollar amount for each item. We'll also look at product formulation statements, or if it's a New York State grown and certified vendor information for any New York State products. So after you do the application, we'll be reaching out and we'll be, just kind of going through to make sure that the items that you have are New York and that you have all the information that we need to approve you. Once the SFAs are approved, you'll be contacted by one of our team members and we'll set up a review date where we'll ask for more documentation for a more in-depth review. So some of that documentation would be your total annual food costs, your total annual sales, total annual reimbursement school lunch sales, your total food costs for lunch for the New York State. We may ask for procurement documentation for contracts, price lists, things like that. Purchase orders and invoices for New York State products. We may ask for the menus and a selection of lunch production records just to validate your paperwork, and any other documentation associated with the 30%. So we kind of go through it, see what you have, and then we kind of work with you. If we need additional information, we reach out and we'll ask for that information. So we're kind of working with you along this whole process. There is a lot of, going back and forth just to make sure that we have everything. But like I said, you're kind of talking to our the members of our team throughout this whole process. So we're here to help you. I know it's a little bit intimidating and confusing, but our staff, will reach out to you. We'll explain things to you. If you want to send us stuff ahead of time, we're willing to look at it, give you some guidance on it, as much as we can. We know this is a crazy year, so there's a lot of confusion just this past year or so. So, just let us know, and we'll work with you, and hopefully we'll get more and more people applying for the 30%. So this is just our information. We have a 30% email if you want to send any questions to us, or you can call our office number and just ask for either Tara or myself or a special teams representative, and then we can help you with any questions you have. So I'm not sure if any came through. Cheryl, did any questions come through the chat?
So no questions came through. I'm going to ask you to just just verify one thing. So while it's important to keep the paperwork, through for all of the months, because you don't know what kind of sample they're going to ask for, you guys don't require, like, you're asking for a sampling across the board, right? So not production records for 10 months and invoices for 10 months, etc. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah,
that.
I should have
No, it's good.
Yeah, so we take a sample of, the production records, the invoices that we're looking at. We just want to make sure that we can validate it. So we won't ask for a year's worth of, we look for the 3 products. So we'll ask for information on a processed item that you have, unprocessed item, that you have, and milk, because milk is really the largest item that most schools are going to have. That will, they could take them out if they didn't have enough milk costs in there. So, so we're, trying to make this a less, burdensome we know you guys have a lot to do, especially with everything going on. And we're just going to look at that sample. As long as we can tell that everything looks okay, we're not going to ask for all, crazy amount of paperwork. We just want to be able to validate it, to have integrity of the program.
That's great. Thanks, Michelle. And
You're welcome.
I haven't seen any questions come in the chat. We
Okay.
did reserve a few minutes, so if somebody wants to go off mute and ask a question, feel free. Otherwise, you can continue. You could plug them into the chat. But kind of now's your chance to ask state ed if you, well, not forever. Obviously, they're going to be around, but if you want to go off mute, feel free.
Sure, we'll stay on a little bit longer just in case someone thinks of something along the way. We'll be here, so.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Michelle. You want to take it away, Katie and Christy?
Yep, I think Katie is up next.
Sure. So, yeah, so it sounds like there's no questions for state ed at this time. Okay. All right. So, thank you, Tara and Michelle, for walking us through that process. What we're going to talk about next are some key takeaways and best practices from the schools that were successful in doing the 30% in the first couple of years. This did not include last year's data at all. So all in all, dairy and apple purchases are almost 2/3 of New York food product expenditures. So you're going to get a lot of the way there with just your milk and just your apples, assuming that you have New York State milk and New York State apples, of course. But you should be getting New York State apples because in the Hudson Valley, you can't drive 5 miles without running into an apple orchard. So you want to be trying as hard as you can to be spending your money on New York State apples. So together, those two around the 20%. Some schools, almost a quarter, just qualified or like got almost all the way there just with dairy. So it really depends on your purchasing patterns and your menu. But the key takeaway here is you're probably closer than you think, and you're probably closing a gap that's maybe 10% or somewhere around there, but probably not going from like 5% to 30. So just to keep that in mind. So I see a question in the chat. Is that a question for state ed while we still have them? So the question was, can you suggest an easy way to collect, keep, track New York products with records and data? I will say we have a collection of curated tracking tools from other schools across the state that have been successful. Some are really, really simple. Some are a bit more complicated, and it really depends on how many vendors you're purchasing from. So that's kind of our stock answer. And I think Katie and Christy are going to talk about that in a moment. Michelle and Tara, did you see anything that was like particularly like, wow, as you go through the applications that bears mention?
Hi. Yeah, but what we have seen that seems to work a lot for schools is they either, I think the hardest part is if you kind of wait till the end of the school year to gather everything. So the ones that seem to have it, they kind of along the way of the school year, they sometimes have an Excel tracker that they use. Some people have their POS systems that are set up so that they can, easily separate out the lunch and the breakfast. They'll actually have a button just for lunch for certain items. So that way they can run a report at the end and it's a little bit easier for them. Scanning invoices as they come in, putting them in a folder just for the 30% so that you kind of have everything in that one folder along the way. Like I said, I think the biggest thing is just not to wait till the end of the year to kind of pull everything together because it can be overwhelming. Production records, schools have to keep that on file anyway. Like I said, we're going to pull samples. So, you'll have that access, but we'll let you know ahead of time what week we're looking at. So it shouldn't be too bad to collect that information. Like I said, we're not going to be looking at all of it. We're just going to be looking at a sample. So I think those are the ones that we've seen that have been working really well.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I just want to give a quick overview of this. This is the different pathways that districts or SFAs took to get to the 30%, and it's broken down by component. So I'm just going to run through a couple examples here. The blue section on each one of these pie charts is dairy. So this one is an example of a district, or sorry, an SFA that was high, that spent a lot on fruit. So we have quite a bit on dairy, of course, but then another 30% on fruit. So that's, 90% of the 30% was just fruit and dairy. This example is higher protein. So again, a lot of milk purchases here, but also higher protein, which also tends to be a higher cost item. So it adds up really quickly. And then the gap there is filled in with vegetables and some other items. This one is very heavy on the dairy and then a little bit fruit. So 82% of that 30% they got just with dairy. And then the last one here is half dairy, the other half more or less fruits and vegetables, and then some protein in there. So the key takeaway here is that there's no one way to get to 30%. The only thing all of these have in common is that they are significantly incorporating New York State dairy. So that's really important. Otherwise, the way you get to 30% is really dependent on your menu, what you have access to, and what you're putting on your menu. So this is an overview of all of the purchases that were made by the schools that got to 30%. And I just want to point out this middle column here. So this is the range of what was spent in each, I always say food group, but the component. So dairy, again, super high, cannot do this without your New York State dairy. And then the others, fruit, protein, vegetables, all vary quite a bit. So you could spend $0 on some of these, all the way up to a third of what you're spending could be on some of these other food groups. Grain is always much smaller because there's not as much available, but it's still, well, and we'll talk about this, but it's still certainly an option. And with that, I will leave that there. These are the most purchased items. So again, milk, number one, and then we have a mix of other different foods. Grape juice, apples, of course, we talked about the importance of apples. And then we have some beef products and a smattering of other dairy. One of the important things here is that the brand or the variety is really important. So obviously you can't just stick any yogurt in and say it's New York. You have to make sure you're getting a New York State yogurt. And these are also examples of some really easy swaps you could make. So if you have some of these on your menu already, you could switch them out for a New York State product. All right. The key takeaway here is that there are lots of tools available for you as food service directors to use when you're trying to get to 30%. So of the schools that were, the SFAs that were successful, 71% of them used micro purchases. And that was actually reported as the most useful tool. So make sure that's something that keeping in your rotation. 59% used small purchases. 51% used geographic preference in their bid language. And this one is one we have a whole workshop on coming up in a couple of weeks. And you should have gotten that information already, but if you haven't, and you want it, we will be sending that out again. So we encourage everyone to sign up for that to learn more detail, and some representatives from State Ed will also be presenting. So it's a really good opportunity to ask any detailed questions you have. And then another 47% aggregated orders with neighboring SFAs. So that's a way you can take advantage of order minimum, or get to an order minimum, or take advantage of lower prices when you're buying in quantity. Last takeaway from this is that virtually all of these SFAs used more than one of these. So you don't want to just rely on one tool. Try to use as many as you can to help you with your purchasing. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Christy.
Thanks, Katie. So we talked about, determining that 30% number. And as soon as you figure out what that dollar amount is, you should start to look at what you're already purchasing. So it's possible that you, are close to that 30% already, and maybe only need to close the gap, as Katie mentioned, of 10%. Whatever that dollar amount is, so first you look at what you're spending on, let's say, dairy products and apples, making sure those are New York State products. And then, Katie and I and Lindsay can work with you to figure out some sort of plan to fill help you reach that 10% or whatever the amount is gap that's still left. And so, as we mentioned before, the milk was the big unknown, let's say, for the Hudson Valley region. And what I was hoping that you could all do is just drop really quickly in the chat what brand of milk it is that you guys are receiving. If there's more than one, please just throw them all in there. We're just looking for sort of fluid milk. And that'll help sort of help inform us as to what is moving around our areas. And as we said before, we do know that New York Milk is coming online, and you guys are possibly already purchasing a bunch of it. And so the brands that we know are available that are New York is Midland and Hudson Valley Fresh. Hudson Valley Fresh is, I think, in the upper Hudson Valley area. I believe they won the OGS bid. And Midland Milk is being distributed primarily, I think, in the lower Hudson Valley through a couple of distributors that are common. And there's also Creamaland, which I know is for this region, for the lower Hudson Valley region, it won the OGS bid. And we're in discussions with where they're sourcing their milk right now. And so hopefully we'll have that resolved as well. Where that could also possibly be an eligible product. So once you guys are getting New York milk, then that will put you really close to that 30%. So, and we can go into the next slide. So this is just an overview of things other than fluid, or the overview of all the dairy items that were purchased by SFAs. New York dairy items that were purchased by SFAs. And as you can see, 80% was actually fluid milk, but there are other products that are available that you can tap into to help you fill that gap. Some things that are available and that were purchased quite often are yogurt and cheese sticks. So if there's many yogurt and cheese stick New York products, and sour cream and cottage cheese were also purchased. But obviously a much smaller percent than that fluid milk. And I think Katie is going to talk a little bit now about sort of how you can find these other products and incorporate them into your meal planning. So take it away, Katie.
Right. Yeah, so this is the information that's hopefully most useful to you when you're thinking through how to bring in these products. So finding and incorporating local. We have some of these strategies here, the 30% database. I'll talk about all of these, of course. Product substitutions, incorporating high cost items as a feature. So maybe not every day, but once a month, once in a while, however often you want to do that. And then blending commodity foods with New York food. So that's an example of a way you can help manage the cost of some of the higher cost protein foods. So the 30% database, I know I can't really see everyone's faces, but if you know about this or have used it, give me like a little thumbs up or some kind of indication in the chat, however, that you know about this. And I'm going to just keep talking while that happens. Christy knows about it. Great. So the 30% database was developed by Harvest New York, and this is trying to show all of the New York State products that are available to schools, to SFAs in the state. And right now, you can go in there. I can't show you on here, but the link is in the chat. You can search by product. You could search by vendor. You could search by food component. So you can look up, say you want New York State cheese. You can try to find one in here. You can just look at your vendors. You could look up Ginsburg and see a list of items they're carrying. So there's a bunch of different ways you can use it. And I also want to mention that almost everything in here has the paperwork that you're going to need to submit to state ed. So there's product formulation statements, New York grown and certified certificates should be all in there. Trying to make it as user-friendly as possible. Also mention that we are always trying to find new products that can be added there. So if maybe Thurston's is carrying, 100 extra New York products that aren't listed here, that's where we come in. We're trying to get that list and get it into this database, so you're not trying to figure that out on your own. All right, so here are some easy substitutions you can make. So these are the common foods you might be menuing already. Cheese, we have Great Lakes cheese, Cabot, and Upstate Farms. Those are New York products you could easily swap in. Beans, so Genesee Valley makes a bean, a New York State bean, which is not a canned bean. It is a dried bean. With that caveat in mind, it's something that you could incorporate into your menu. Applesauce, Mott's and Zzz's, both are New York State products. Juice, Welch's grape juice makes a New York State product that you could put in. So if you're doing orange juice or some other kind of juice, you could easily swap in this one without changing much. And then produce, any fresh or minimally processed produce you can find produced locally. You can swap in for something that's out of state, especially in the beginning and end of the school year when we're really in the growing season. The key here is not spending your pilot or DOD dollars on local or New York State produce, but spending your money, your budget money on that, and then saving your pilot dollars for the winter when it's harder to find that product. Now we're going to go by food component, and we're going to point out some specific brands and specific vendors where you can procure some of these foods. So for dairy, we talked about dairy a little bit, but Hudson Valley Fresh, likely Midland, and Cream-O-Land are New York State products. For yogurt, Chobani Upstate makes a yogurt in bulk, like a 5-gallon container of it. And Hudson Valley Fresh also makes yogurt. North Country Creamery would be one that's available to the SFAs that are in the North Country. And then for cheese, Great Lakes, Cabot, these are all ones that I mentioned in the last slide, and Upstate. For sour cream and ice cream, probably not as common, but there are New York State versions of those available. And if we're thinking through, where to get them, obviously your fluid milk is coming straight from your dairy distributor, but Thurston, Ginsburg, both have some of these cheeses, some of these yogurts. And then Red Barn carries some more specialty cheeses if you wanted to use it as a feature.
Katie, can I chime in quickly?
Yes.
I just didn't want to put it in the chat because it's an important point. So you see the big companies on there, Great Lakes, Mott's, Zzz's, not their entire product line qualifies. And so it's just a really important point that it's product specific. So Great Lakes makes probably hundreds of cheeses. There's about 80 of them that qualify and 15 or so that are available across New York. So I always point out to reference the database or connect with Katie and Christy or Lindsay in the North Country to make sure you're buying a qualifying product, because again, not their entire product line qualifies. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. And there is a question in the chat. Would part of the Zzz's count if you divert for it? I'm gonna let Cheryl answer that question. Just to make sure we're giving out right info.
So anything that you buy with your entitlement dollars doesn't count for the 30%. If it's going into a product that's further processed, there's pieces of that can be counted. And so I'm actually going to bounce that to, do we still have Tara and or Michelle on with us? Let me look. Did we lose them? No, Michelle, do you want to answer the question about the diversion?
Sure. So just like you were saying, the entitlement dollars, you wouldn't be able to count that because it's at no cost to you. You're getting it for free. However, you can do any shipping or delivery costs any additional processing that it costs you, warehouse storage fees, things like that. You can count that in.
As long as it's used at lunch.
Yeah, I'm
It's a
sorry.
New York State product.
Exactly. I'm sorry. Yeah, at lunchtime. I don't know if you heard Tara or not.
Can you just repeat that? Did Tara just clarify it was for lunch only, right?
Yeah, yep, only if it's a New York State product and it's also used at lunch. Yep.
Great, thank you. So if anyone who's interested in that, maybe that's another conversation. We can dive into those weeds if you're interested. All right, so for protein foods, here are some examples of protein foods that are more or less available. Hot dogs and beef. Beef is available from Slate Food. Chicken. So chicken is something that's not widely available, but Christy has had conversations with some of the smaller local suppliers that have provided chicken products to schools, but it's not generally available on a wholesale, widely distributable amount. So we're actually going to take another moment to ask you all a question. So if you were able to get local New York chicken, what cuts of chicken would be most useful to you? And about how much do you think you would purchase? So would you purchase 50 pounds? Would you purchase 5,000 pounds? Keeping in mind that we know price is a consideration. I'm going to talk about that next, actually. But just to give us a general idea so we can start having more of these conversations. So I'm just going to ask you to put that in the chat. Maybe Christy, you can type in the chat what that question is again, because it was a little bit long-winded. That was chicken. So for beans, dried beans are available from Genesee Valley. Currently not carried by any local distributors, but it's something we could definitely work on, especially if there are more than one SFA that's interested in purchasing. So here, we just want to acknowledge the cost of protein foods, especially when you're generally able to get most of these foods at no cost to you through commodity program. So this is the kind of thing you would want to feature as a highlight, really market it to your students and your families, and do it kind of as a monthly or however often feature. So you can see here some of the costs of the different products per 2-ounce serving. So burger patties are the most, but there's also all these other beef products, the chicken, if we could bring it in. Tofu, if you want to try to incorporate tofu, we could try to bring that in. And then we have our beans, of course. So another strategy to offset the cost, aside from doing it as a feature, would be to blend with commodity food. So if you have ground beef, for example, you could take half of your Slate ground beef, blend it with, a little less than half of commodity ground beef, and you could do it that way too to help manage the cost. Right now, Dagley is the only distributor that's carrying Slate Foods. So this is something we would be happy to work on. But right now, probably most SFAs are purchasing from Dagley. So if you do that, they could deliver anywhere they're already going for Slate products. All right, so for fruit, there's lots of fruit available. Again, we have tons of apples, generally available all year, or at least most of the year. In September, maybe even into October, we have pears, we have grapes, maybe peaches. So there's plenty of fresh fruit available, and this would be a good opportunity to also use your small or micro purchase powers here. If you want to have some more processed fruit products, maybe in the winter months, Welch's has a juice that does qualify. So does Red Jacket, which is a little more expensive, but those are both options. And then applesauce, which we talked a little bit about, but that's always an option. And since Mott's is a big national brand, it's going to be a little more price competitive than maybe something a little more local. Sorry, here we go. All right, I think we all know where we can get our fruit from: Dagley, Red Barn, Zafars. The key here is to think through how you're using your pilot or your DoD dollars and trying to spend those more on out-of-state products. Also, Ginsberg, Cisco, Thurston's, those are the distributors that are going to carry your juices, your applesauce, things like that. Right now, there's really not frozen fruit available, but that potentially could change in the future. Same thing with vegetables. Dagley, Red Barn, Zafars, those are our sources for our vegetables. And right now, there are not a lot of I'll say there aren't any processed vegetable items available, but Headwater Food Hub is working on developing a line of IQF vegetables, so that may be coming down the pike in the future. Okay, grains. So there's not as many options for grain foods. We have oats available, and this brand also makes granola. It's a New York State granola product. So we have those, which we don't currently carry in the Hudson Valley, but again, that's something we're working on bringing in. Pita chips are available. And then there's the pasta. So this is a brand new product that is just available this school year. So this is from Sfalini, which is based in Coxsackie, so right here in our backyards. And it is qualifying as a whole grain for schools, and it qualifies as a New York State food product. So right now, the way to order it is to order basically a whole pallet directly from Sfalini, it's quite a lot, it's 700 pounds, but it's also an opportunity to potentially aggregate and come together with an SFA that's adjacent to you, or 2 or 3, and then split a pallet, and you can bring the cost down that way. Otherwise, you're going to pay a lot more per pound. But that product it works out to around $1.75 a pound for when you order by the pallet. So that's something that's new and exciting, and Chrissy or I could definitely help coordinate aggregating with that. And we're also trying to talk about our local distributors carrying it, so you don't have to order an entire pallet. All right, I will hand it to Christy unless there's any questions.
So I don't hear anything. So the next step that you need to consider is, now that you have this nice list of products, how are you going to get them in your kitchens and in your cafeterias? So we're going to have to think a little bit about, what your current strategies are, and make some changes in order to, access these new products. So, and this was mentioned before, so you're going to have to consider sort of seasonal availability of the local products. We live in Northeast, it's snowy for quite a few months out of the year. And it's hard to grow things in frozen ground. So we have to keep that in mind when you're doing your purchases. There are some things that just aren't available. However, there are storage crops that are available throughout the season, so throughout the school year. So, those you can always keep in the back of your head as possibilities. And then, so how you're purchasing these products, looking to take advantage of these different ways of bidding, the small purchases and micro purchases, in order to access the products that you would need. So, use all the tools that are available to you. And then, as Katie mentioned, we are sort of working on the back end with distributors, but there's also an opportunity for you guys to work together to organize and aggregate the purchases to either bring costs down or to actually meet any minimum orders that they might be, like a giant pallet of pasta. So, and then also this relates to the different bid options that you have, and we have an entire training on this, so I will just mention it. There's using geographic preference in your bids so that you can target the local items. So the big question, we go next slide. So the big question everybody asks is, what about all my entitlement funds? Like, how do I justify buying local products when I can get them from when I can get them free from the USDA? So yes, you're going to have to really take this stuff into consideration. And as you can see here, almost 70% of the school food SFAs changed how they use their entitlement money so that they could get more local products. And the big, I mentioned some of these things before. You're going to have to look at how you're buying things and maybe make some changes. So one of the ways to do this is to sort of balance out these costs of local products with your entitlement dollars. And some of the techniques you can use are to basically front and back load your menus so that New York State items, you can purchase New York State items when they're available. As I mentioned before, there are some products that are available year round: apples, beets, cabbage, onions, potatoes. You can usually find them throughout the season, throughout the school year. And then you also do get some products that will take you through March. But as spring comes around, they're not really available anymore. But we did pull out by the month some common products that you can find. So September, you've got broccoli and cauliflower and peppers, and didn't put tomatoes in there, but they're also usually available in September. And once you get into the winter months, the cold weather vegetables like broccoli and kale are available again. And then make sure September through November, you're ordering these products from one of the local vendors and not to your entitlement dollars. But once December hits and you get into those really cold months and the fields are all buried under snow, that's when you use the pilot money, the DoD, fresh vegetables funds, and the commodity purchases, so that you can sort of address that gap of money, that 30% that you're trying to reach. And then in May and June in the spring times, we get the quickly fast-growing spring crops like lettuce and spinach, and maybe if it's a good season, we'll get some zucchinis in May and June. So you can go to the next slide. Some of the other techniques that we have mentioned a little bit is sort of mixing these commodity products with your New York State products. So you can buy, half a New York burger, basically. So half of your hamburger or meatballs or whatever can come from New York State meat, and the other half you can get from the USDA purchases, and just to keep the costs down. Or as you're thinking about your menu items, use beef crumbles, which is like pre-cooked, which I just learned was pre-cooked, essentially ground beef. And then you can mix that, make a chili, and mix that with, tomato sauce that you actually get from the commodity purchases. And the same thing with the IQF produce. Katie mentioned that right now we don't have any frozen vegetables, but that's something that might be coming online soon. And so, a half commodity frozen broccoli and half from New York State. And then of course there's some stuff that we just can't grow here. You need no snow, like citrus and bananas, and so those you can all purchase from USDA whenever you need it. And also keep in mind that seasonal buying. So strawberries in June from New York, and from the rest of the year you buy them from the commodity purchases. And also, Cheryl, I don't know if you want to plug right now the meeting about planning menus. And
No, we haven't set that in stone yet, but
Okay.
we will be offering, the Cornell Farm to School program work team will be offering a menu planning webinar that talks about balancing these costs specifically. And so we'll make sure that you get access to that should you want to join it. We're looking at December for that.
Thanks. So the last, going to the next slide. The last sort of technique that we had talked about was, work together, basically. We have an opportunity here to, take advantage of economies of scale, I guess, if you're able to cooperate with on a regional basis. So we'd already mentioned, purchasing that pallet of pasta. Hopefully there's, an option for storage somewhere, and then you can all work together to get a pallet and at a somewhat reasonable price for these items. If you don't already, BOCES often does a cooperative purchase agreements, and so there's another opportunity there. And somewhat related to this is that if every SFA crafts a bid with a piggyback clause in it, that means that every other FSA can purchase off of that bid. So, if you receive a bid from a good price from a local purveyor who can offer the product you're interested in, if they're willing to drive down to where you are, or if you're right next to them, you can purchase off of a bid from another SFA. And then we do have the opportunity of having a lot of food hubs in the region. So Catskills Food Hub, Hudson Valley Farm Hub, and Hudson Harvest all are already aggregating orders and have this experience, so you can take advantage of this. And so and they could possibly provide that last mile delivery that is maybe a little bit more difficult for the regional farms to make. So those are all sort of other techniques you can tap into to make this stuff possible. And then finally, the last sort of tool that we had mentioned is a geographic preference. And I'm not going to talk much about this because we are doing a webinar on November 9th that will cover in detail how you can craft these bids. But generally, it's just you're allowed to award points that enable you to put a radius of production, production radius for your product. So if you want to make sure that you're purchasing apples from 100 miles from your school district, this is, it gives preference to those farms. And I think now it's Katie.
There we go. I also want to address, there's a question. Is there any hope in the future of having breakfast be a part of this initiative, even if it would be a higher percentage requirement? So right now it's just lunch, but I would, and Cheryl, you can also address this, but you could also join, it's the, correct me if I'm wrong, New York Grown Food for New York Kids Coalition.
Well done.
Oh, it's the worst acronym. It doesn't spell anything. And you are, if you wanted to join that and kind of get involved, they would welcome food service director involvement. And we can email out the contact to get on that email list after this meeting.
Yeah, and all I would add, and I'm sorry I missed that question, I would have answered it. They are putting forward a recommendation this year. I don't know if it's set in stone, but I'm pretty sure that it is, to include breakfast in the calculation. It's an advocacy group, so obviously there needs to be legislative support for that decision to be passed. But that's currently going on right now. And so just to reiterate what Katie said, the coalition has been in existence for a handful of years now, and they are kind of the advocacy organization behind the 30% initiative and any changes associated with it. So I'll drop the contact in the chat box, and if you're interested in getting involved, more food service director voice is always welcomed.
All right, so I want to talk, we have a few minutes left. I'm not going to dive into all of the details here, but just touch on it, and also any detailed questions we can ask our state ed representatives. Tara and Michelle mentioned the importance of documentation, tracking and documenting as you go. So the applications for this are due in August. You do not want to wait till July to start putting it together. Track it from the beginning, if possible, or as soon thereafter as you can. And you just want to have all the documentation ready to go, as you go along through the year. So Christy or I or Lindsay can, depending on where you're located, can assist you with this portion of the administrative piece of it. So we can assist you with a lot of it, but really if you need to find product formulation statements, you need some examples of spreadsheets, you want to sit down and go through your invoices, that's one of the things we can do. So for example, if your produce distributor is not clearly indicating on their invoices that these apples are indeed from New York State and such farm, that's a conversation we can have, because that affects all of the districts, all of the SFAs, in our region. So we only want to have that conversation once, not 20 times with a million different food service directors. All right, so when we're documenting generally we're documenting two things. So one is the documentation that the foods that you're claiming are indeed from New York State. So you want to have that paper trail all ready to go. And we break it down between processed, unprocessed, or processed foods. So our unprocessed foods are your bushel of apples, for example. So for that, you need, the farmer invoice or a distributor invoice. It just has to clearly say it's from New York. If it says it's local, farm fresh, homegrown, anything like that, that's not acceptable. It does have to say New York State. So that's, one kind of food. And then we have our processed foods, which are a little more complicated. So that would be something like, let's just say pasta. So two options here. We can show that it's New York grown and certified. If it is, that's easy. We have the certificates. If it's not, then we need what we call a product formulation statement. We often just say PFS, but that's what it is. And it's a manufacturer standardized form that shows how much of that product is produced in New York State. So we're trying to make sure that it's all at least 51% New York State. And so if you don't have those and you need them, we can help either find them, or if they don't exist, get them created and make sure they're all filled out correctly. Because we don't want to go through it all and then in August, have to go back and redo a bunch of forms. So that's showing that we have our New York State products. And then we also want to show where you're spending your money. So one of the big things you have to track is your milk or any other item that you use for both breakfast and lunch. So it has to be an accurate count. You can't just say 30% of my milk is for breakfast. So that's not enough. It does have to be a count. So you can use your production records, and you have a master sheet just tracking exactly how many milks you're serving at lunch versus at breakfast. It doesn't have to be complicated, but we just do have to show that. And again, that's something we can help you with. We also have to show monthly spending. So you want to track it month to month, try and make sure you're at or just a little bit above 30% as you go. And you can course correct if needed. You don't want to get to the end of the year and realize you're like a couple $100 short and maybe this could have all been fine. But you want to track as you go. And we do have sample spreadsheets that other SFAs have used that we can share with you to make this process easier. So I will leave the documentation piece there. There's definitely more to it, but if you're going to go down that road, we could get into it at that time. So we just want to quickly highlight some of the opportunities that we know about and highlight some of the next steps we're taking. And obviously, any feedback on this is great. If there's something that's not on here that you think should be, let us know. So we're continuing to identify available New York food products. If they're already in existence and they just need to be put into a distributor's truck, that's great. We can definitely work on that. If there are opportunities for new product development, so if we want a dinner roll that is made with New York State grain, that's something, probably a longer term project that we could also work on. And so if you have ideas of New York products that you want to see, please put them in the chat. Even if you think they're completely unrealistic, that's okay. We still like to hear the ideas. And who knows, they might be more realistic than we think. So there's potential in the future for meet and greets with some farmers, and bring food service directors together. So we start to be able to put faces to our farmers and, have that communication going around. And also intentional production planning. So thinking about what you as food service directors need for your menu before the farmers are planting their crops, so they can plan accordingly and they're not going to run short on really common school food items. Also working that into the bids. So there's more discussion we could have about that. And I'd encourage everyone to attend Geographic Preference workshop on the 9th if you haven't registered already. So yeah, if there's anything you really want to see that's New York, please put it in the chat. And I think we'll kind of leave it at that. We have the trainings coming up. We're happy to meet with you, Christy, myself, or Lindsay. Just email any one of us, really. If you're not sure which counties we represent, just let us know. We'll make sure you get in touch with the right person. And we're happy to sit down with you and talk about your readiness for the 30%, how to put together a plan, how to document, whatever it is you need. We are here to help make that process a little bit smoother. And that is it. I think we have 10 minutes or so for questions. So I will stop sharing my screen. The Hudson Valley is a new region for our team, unfortunately, and farm to school is more than just the 30%. So I'm kind of the loyalist that was there long before the 30% came for all the good reasons that farm to school presents. And so I don't want it to just be about that. If you're interested in just doing procurement and not necessarily going after the 30%, that's okay too. We like those champions. So it's definitely not tied to that. But there is, with milk being available in the Hudson Valley for the first time, it does put the 30% on the table. So we did kind of want to put this front and center. The reimbursement is nice. It's a nice chunk of change. And we want to make sure schools have access to it while it lasts. I mean, it's not codified in law yet. And so arguably could go away. We hope it won't. It does have bipartisan support. So thanks, Lindsay, for doing that. And my point in kind of bringing that up is we are building out kind of the framework in the Hudson Valley. So working with the distributors for the first time, finding products that are available. We routinely get companies coming to us and saying, hey, I want to get involved in this program. What can I develop or what can I reformulate? And so that type of communication, again, even if it's like pie in the sky, pasta would have been pie in the sky a few years ago. And it's so cool that we have it available now. So again, kind of just think about those opportunities, and that's information that we can take back to the manufacturing side, because there are a handful of them that have actually created products just for this market. Just because of the 30%. And we hope we continue to see that because there's that good tie back to the farmers. We'll let everyone go 3 minutes early. If you think of questions afterwards or just want to connect with us, we'll be sending out all our contact information. So feel free to email us with any question, big or comment, big or small. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for hanging in there with us. Bye-bye.